The recycled air of Flight 821 hummed with a monotonous drone, a sound designed for lulling passengers into a state of benign boredom. For Eva Rostova, seated in 15B, the sound was a poor substitute for the raw, thundering symphony of a military-grade turbine. Here, she was just another face in the crowd, a woman in a simple gray sweater and jeans, her hair tied back in a neat, unassuming bun. Her face, framed by the oval window, reflected a landscape of clouds and a deeper, more turbulent landscape of memory. The world outside was a canvas of brilliant blue and blinding white, a place she once commanded but now merely observed. She was returning from her father's funeral, the last anchor to a life before the sky had claimed her. The quiet dignity of his service, a life spent as a mechanic who kept pilots like her safe, felt like a distant shore she could no longer reach. She was adrift, the call of the wild blue yonder now a haunting echo rather than a clarion call. In the cockpit, Captain Marcus Thorne stretched, a picture of practiced ease. 40 years old, with a jawline he felt was made for airline posters and a voice cultivated to sound like warm honey over the intercom, he was the king of this aluminum tube. "Another on-time departure, Ben," he said to his much younger first officer, Ben Carter. "Just keep the coffee hot and the flight attendants smiling. That's the secret. Passengers are just self-loading cargo. Keep them comfortable and they won't bother you." Ben offered a non-committal murmur. He respected Thorne's hours, but not his attitude. Thorne keyed the mic for his welcome announcement, his voice dripping with condescending charm, reminding passengers to stay seated and obey the crew because, as he put it, "We're the professionals up here, and our only job is to get you to your vacation photos safely." He clicked off the mic and chuckled. "Like herding cats." Eva closed her eyes, letting the captain's hollow bonhomie wash over her. She had heard 100 versions of that voice, men whose confidence was built on the stable bedrock of routine, who had never felt an aircraft scream as it tore itself apart around them. The first indication of trouble was not a sound, but a feeling, a subtle, sickening shudder that vibrated up through the floor, a tremor of discord in the aircraft's steady hum. Eva's eyes snapped open, instantly alert. It was the kind of vibration a seasoned mechanic feels in their bones, the kind a pilot recognizes as the prelude to a nightmare. A few passengers glanced around, their brows furrowed, before returning to their movies and magazines. Then came the sound. It was not a bang, but a deep, guttural roar, a noise of metal under duress, failing catastrophically. The plane gave a violent, sickening lurch to the right. A chorus of shrieks filled the cabin as overhead bins popped open, spilling bags and coats into the aisle. The left wing, visible from Eva's window, was suddenly streaked with a plume of black smoke, ugly and ominous against the pristine white clouds. The aircraft banked sharply, its nose pitching down into a terrifying dive. The cheerful drone was replaced by the high-pitched scream of wind and the cacophony of panicked cries. A flight attendant, her face a mask of trained composure rapidly cracking, was thrown against the bulkhead. Eva remained preternaturally still amidst the chaos. Her body was braced, her breathing controlled. Her mind, however, was a whirlwind of cold, hard calculation. Uncontained engine failure. Number 1 engine. Asymmetrical thrust. Look at that yaw rate. They're losing aerodynamic control. She wasn't a passenger anymore. She was a pilot, her instincts, honed over thousands of hours in machines designed to defy death, firing in rapid succession. She watched the angle of the wing against the horizon, saw the terrifying speed at which the ground, a patchwork of green and brown, was beginning to swell into view. The pilots were fighting it, she could feel the shudder of the control surfaces, but they were losing. In the cockpit, a Christmas tree of warning lights flashed in a frantic, blinding rhythm. Alarms blared, a symphony of electronic despair. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, Zenith 821, engine 1 failure, we are in an uncontrolled descent." Ben Carter yelled into the radio, his voice cracking with adrenaline. Captain Thorne wrestled with the yoke, his knuckles white, his face slick with sweat. His practiced airline captain calm had evaporated, replaced by a raw primal fear. "She won't respond! The rudder is jammed! Come on, you beasts, fly!" he grunted, throwing his full weight against the controls. The plane, however, had a mind of its own, locked in a deadly spiral toward the Earth. They were a leaf in a hurricane. Checklist! Run the checklist! Thorn barked, the desperation raw in his voice. Already did, Marcus! Engine fire protocol, fuel cutoff, fire extinguisher deployed. Nothing! The hydraulics must be compromised. Ben shot back, his fingers flying over the console, trying to find a combination of inputs that would make sense of the chaos. The altimeter was unwinding at a horrifying rate. 20,000 feet. 18,000 feet. 15,000 feet. The ground was no longer a map. It was a destination, rushing toward them with terminal velocity. We've lost it, Thorn whispered, the words a surrender. The arrogance that had defined him just minutes before was gone, stripped away by the sheer, overwhelming violence of the situation. He looked at the terrified face of his young co-pilot, and saw his own failure reflected back. He had flown this route 1,000 times. It was supposed to be easy. It was just another day of herding cargo. But the sky did not care for routine. It demanded respect, and it was now claiming its due. Chaos reigned in the cabin. The violent descent had created a terrifying sensation of weightlessness, followed by a crushing force that pinned everyone to their seats. Luggage slid down the aisle. A service cart, dislodged from its galley, crashed into a row of seats with a sickening crunch. People were screaming, crying, a desperate flood of prayers and final goodbyes filling the air. The lead flight attendant, clinging to a jump seat, tried to shout instructions, but her voice was lost in the din amidst it all. Eva Rostova was an island of impossible tranquility. She had unbuckled her seatbelt. Her movements were fluid and deliberate, a stark contrast to the jerky, panicked motions of those around her. She wasn't panicking because her mind was too busy. It was processing data, analyzing the specific frequency of the vibrations, the precise angle of the dive, the sickening yaw that was pulling them into a flat spin. They've lost lateral control, she thought, her internal monologue a detached, clinical assessment. The vertical stabilizer is likely damaged or the rudder hard over. Conventional recovery won't work. They're trying to fight it with the yoke, but that's just making the spin worse. She remembered an instructor from test pilot school, a grizzled old colonel with eyes that had seen it all. When the machine is dying, he'd said, you stop trying to fly it. You have to understand it. Listen to what it's telling you. She could hear what the crippled aircraft was saying. It was screaming for a different kind of input, a language of physics and desperation that was not in the standard commercial pilot's manual. The plane shuddered again, more violently this time, and Eva knew their time was running out. They had seconds, not minutes. The choice was no longer hers to make. The sky was calling her back, one last time. Captain Thorn, his face ashen, looked at the altimeter. 7,000 feet. The automated system began to call out their demise in a calm, female voice. Terrain. Terrain. Pull up, the irony was galling. Pull up on what? Thorn roared at the machine. He had tried everything. Every procedure, every emergency maneuver, every ounce of his experience was useless. The aircraft was a multi-ton coffin, and he was the unwilling pallbearer for 186 souls, including his own. In a final, desperate act, a move born of utter helplessness, he grabbed the PA microphone. His voice, stripped of its practiced charm, was a ragged plea that echoed through the terrified cabin. Attention passengers, he stammered, the words catching in his throat. This is the captain. We have a critical flight control malfunction. He took a shaky breath. Is there anyone on this aircraft with multi-engine flight experience? Any military or commercial pilots? If you are on this plane, please identify yourself to the cabin crew immediately. We need assistance in the cockpit. I repeat, this is not a drill. We need help. A profound, stunned silence fell over the cabin, deeper and more terrifying than the previous screams. The request was so far beyond the realm of normalcy that it short-circuited their panic. It was an admission of complete and total failure. Hope, which had been flickering, was now extinguished. For a moment, no one moved. Then, from the middle of the aircraft, a woman in a gray sweater stood up. Eva moved into the aisle, her balance sure and steady despite the bucking of the aircraft. A flight attendant, her eyes wide with terror and confusion, intercepted her. "Ma'am, you need to get back in your seat and brace for impact," she yelled over the roar of the wind. Eva met her gaze, her own eyes clear and calm. There was no time for lengthy explanations. "The captain asked for a pilot," Eva said, her voice steady and low, cutting through the noise. "I'm a pilot." The flight attendant stared at her, her expression a mixture of disbelief and pity. She saw a passenger, a civilian, clearly in shock, succumbing to a dangerous delusion. "Ma'am, please," she insisted, trying to gently push Eva back toward her seat. "This is a serious situation." Eva did not move. She planted her feet and looked past the attendant, toward the front of the plane. She raised her voice just enough to be heard. "Tell the captain that Colonel Eva Rostova is here to assist. Tell him my experience is in post-stall maneuvering and unconventional recovery of experimental airframes. Tell him I have over 3,000 hours, and I have handled 3 uncontained engine failures in flight." Now, she delivered the words with an authority that was absolute, a tone forged in situations far more dire than this. It was the voice of command, and it brooked no argument. The flight attendant froze, the credentials so specific, so far beyond anything a fantasist could invent, that they struck her with the force of truth. She nodded, her face slack with shock, and scrambled for the interphone. A moment later, a cracked voice came back. "Let her in." The cockpit door buzzed open, and Eva stepped inside a world of shrieking alarms and flashing red lights. Captain Thorne, his uniform disheveled and his face pale, glared at her. When he saw a woman of average height, her face etched with a quiet intensity he mistook for fear, his last shred of hope curdled into angry disbelief. "What is this? Get her out of here," he snarled at Ben. "I asked for a pilot, not a passenger having a panic attack." Eva ignored him completely. Her gaze was already fixed on the instrument panel, her mind absorbing the chaotic data stream with startling speed. The primary flight display showed their impossible attitude. The engine instruments confirmed the catastrophic failure of Engine 1. But her eyes locked onto the rudder trim indicator. It was pegged hard to the right. "You have a rudder hard over, not a jam," she stated, her voice cutting through the alarms. "The failure in Engine 1 must have sent shrapnel through the fuselage and severed the hydraulic lines to the rudder actuator, locking it in place. You're in a fully developed flat spin." She looked at the altimeter. 4,000 feet. "You have about 60 seconds before impact." Her diagnosis, delivered with the calm certainty of a surgeon discussing a routine procedure, stunned both men into silence. Thorne's anger dissolved, replaced by a wave of cold shock. This woman wasn't panicking. She was analyzing. She was seeing things he had missed in his own terror. Ben Carter, however, looked at her with a dawning flicker of desperate hope. He didn't care who she was speaking a language of solutions, not problems. "Listen to me very carefully," Eva commanded, her voice now imbued with an unshakable authority that seemed to physically push back against the chaos. She pointed a steady finger at the younger pilot. "First officer," she said, making eye contact. "My name is Eva. Disconnect the autopilot and the autothrottle completely. I need full manual control." Ben, without a second's hesitation, complied, his hands flying to the switches. Thorne started to protest. "You can't just..." But Eva cut him off, her gaze locking onto him. "Captain, I can, and I will. You're fighting the spin with ailerons, which is accelerating it. We are going to fly out of this using asymmetrical thrust and elevator trim. Now I need you to do exactly as I say. Put your hands on the throttle for engine 2. Inch." Thorne, his mind reeling, found himself obeying. The woman's confidence was hypnotic, her commands precise and logical. "When I give the word," Eva continued, her voice a calming anchor in the storm, I want you to advance power on Engine 2 to 80%. Not 1% more. First officer, you will simultaneously apply full forward pressure on the yoke and trim the nose down 10 degrees. We have to break the stall first. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Brace. The ground was now a terrifyingly detailed tapestry of trees and roads. 3,000 feet. Execute. Now. Eva commanded. Thorn pushed the throttle forward. Ben shoved the yoke into the dashboard. The plane groaned in protest. The spin tightened viciously, the G-forces pressing them deep into their seats. For a terrifying second, it seemed she had doomed them all. The aircraft screamed, a symphony of tortured metal. The G-forces were immense, blurring their vision. Then, just as Thorn thought his ribs would crack, something shifted. The violent spin began to loosen its grip. The nose of the plane, which had been aimed at the ground, dipped even further, breaking the aerodynamic stall. It's working! Ben gasped. Nose is down! Airspeed is increasing! Good, Eva said, her voice strained but even. Now, Captain, ease the power on Engine 2 back to 50%. Ben, slowly, gently, bring the nose up. Use your trim tabs, small inputs only. We're flying on a knife's edge. We have to use the one good engine to counteract the pull of that locked rudder. They worked in a strange, focused harmony, a seasoned crew forged in a crucible of imminent death. Eva was the conductor, her voice the only instrument that mattered, calling out power settings, trim adjustments, and airspeed targets. Slowly, agonizingly, the massive, crippled airliner clawed its way out of the dive. The terrifying spiral gave way to a precarious, lopsided flight. They were no longer falling, they were flying. The ground, which had been rushing up to meet them, was now parallel to them, a safe distance below. Silence, profound and heavy, descended upon the cockpit, broken only by the hum of the remaining engine and the ragged breathing of 3 pilots. Captain Marcus Thorne slumped in his seat, his body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. He stared at the woman standing between their seats, her hand resting gently on the center console as if calming a spooked horse. She was just looking out the window, her expression serene. Ben Carter looked at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. Who are you? He whispered, the question hanging in the air. Eva turned her head, a small, weary smile touching her lips. I'm a passenger, she said quietly. Now let's find the nearest airport and get this plane on the ground. They landed at a small regional airport that had scrambled every fire truck and ambulance in a 50-mile radius. Eva talked them through the final approach, her voice a constant, reassuring presence as they flew the wounded bird with a combination of throttle and prayer. The landing was rough, a jarring skid of tires and a groan of stressed metal, but they were down, and they were safe. As the aircraft rolled to a stop, a wave of applause erupted from the cabin, a spontaneous, cathartic release of terror and gratitude. In the cockpit, nobody moved. Thorne finally unbuckled his harness, his hands shaking. He looked at Eva, his eyes filled with a humility he had never known. The arrogance was gone, burned away at 20,000 feet. On the tarmac, surrounded by flashing lights, the passengers deplaned onto mobile stairs, many of them weeping with relief. Eva intended to slip away with them, her job done, the anonymity she craved now a welcome cloak. But a stern-faced man in a suit, flanked by an airline executive, intercepted her at the bottom of the stairs. Ma'am, a moment of your time? The man said, flashing an FAA badge. Captain Thorne stood beside them, his face pale. He stepped forward, stopping directly in front of Eva. He opened his mouth, then closed it, struggling for words. I was a fool, he finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. I was arrogant. You saved 186 lives today because I failed. Thank you is not a big enough word. May I at least know the name of the woman who saved my aircraft? Eva Rostova, she said simply. The name meant nothing to Thorne, but the FAA official's eyes widened in stunned recognition. Rostova? He repeated, his voice hushed. Colonel Eva Rostova? Lead test pilot on the X-47B program? The one who landed the prototype after the dual hydraulic failure over the Mojave? He stared at her as if seeing a ghost. We all read that report. It's required reading at the academy. They said it was the greatest feat of airmanship they'd ever seen. We thought you'd retired, disappeared. Eva simply nodded. She looked past them, at the faces of the passengers gathering nearby, their expressions of awe and gratitude directed at her. The quiet mechanic's daughter, the pilot without a plane, had found her purpose not in the glory of a test flight, but in the humble service of saving others. Her father would have been proud. The sky had taken much from her, but in the heart of its fury, it had given her back herself.